For an entire year I didn't say the word out loud. Not once. Not to my husband, not to my mother, not to my therapist who sat across from me every Wednesday and waited patiently for me to say something that was actually true. My name is Rachel, and 14 months ago I lost my baby at 22 weeks. Her name was Lily. I had already bought her a blanket, white with small yellow stars, and it was still in the drawer of the dresser in the room that was supposed to be hers, in the house where everything had been rearranged to make space for someone who never came home. I want to be clear about something before I go any further, because I think it matters. What happened to me is not uncommon. 1 in 4 pregnancies ends in loss. I know that now in a way I didn't know it before, the way you only truly know something after it has happened to your own body. But knowing it is common doesn't make it feel less solitary, and for a very long time the most honest thing I could say about myself was that I was the most alone I had ever been in a room full of people who loved me. My husband Daniel grieved differently than I did. He talked about it, not constantly, but openly, the way some people can do with painful things, as if saying them out loud takes away some of their weight. He cried at the funeral and then he went back to work and he held my hand every evening and he was, by every measure, a good and present husband. But the way he moved through his grief and the way I didn't move through mine created a distance between us that neither of us knew how to close, and for a long time we were two people sitting in the same house feeling very far away from each other. My mother wanted to talk about Lily. She would bring her up gently, carefully, the way you approach something fragile, a soft mention here, a question there, always with that particular look that meant she was ready to listen if I was ready to speak. And I loved her for it, I genuinely did, but every time she tried I felt something close inside me like a door being pulled shut, and I would change the subject and she would let me and we would both pretend that was fine. My therapist, whose name was Dr. Webb and who was one of the most patient people I have ever encountered, told me in our 3rd session that grief that has no outlet doesn't disappear, it just finds other places to live. I nodded and said I understood and then went home and reorganized my kitchen cupboards for 2 hours because that felt more manageable than whatever she was suggesting I do instead. This went on for almost a year. I stopped going to baby showers. I changed my route to work so I didn't pass the park where the mothers with strollers gathered on Tuesday mornings. I took down the single photograph we had, a scan, 20 weeks, the last one before everything changed, because I couldn't look at it and I couldn't throw it away so I put it in an envelope and put the envelope in a box and put the box in the top of the wardrobe where I didn't have to think about it. I was functioning. I was going to work and cooking dinner and answering emails and doing everything that a person is supposed to do, and I was completely hollowed out inside. And then one Thursday evening in November my colleague Anna mentioned almost in passing that she had started volunteering at a children's home on weekends, a small residential facility about 20 minutes from where we lived, for children between the ages of 2 and 7 who were in temporary state care while longer-term placements were arranged. She said it was hard sometimes but that it gave her something she couldn't quite name. She said, "You don't have to do anything special. You just have to show up." I don't know exactly why those words landed the way they did. I had heard versions of that sentiment before, just show up, just be present, just put one foot in front of the other, and they had always sounded hollow to me, like advice that worked for other people but not for whatever was happening inside me. But something about the way Anna said it that evening, in the middle of a regular Thursday conversation over bad office coffee, made something shift very slightly in a place I had stopped paying attention to. I went home and I looked up the facility online. I read about it for a long time. And then I closed my laptop and went to bed and didn't think about it again for 3 weeks. But I did go back to the website. And then I filled out the inquiry form. And then, on a Saturday morning in December, I drove 20 minutes across the city and walked through a door I had never walked through before, and my life changed in a way I hadn't expected and wasn't ready for and needed more than I knew. The first Saturday I mostly observed. A staff member named Claire walked me through the facility, small rooms painted in cheerful colors, a playroom with shelves of well-loved toys, a garden with a climbing frame that needed repainting. There were 11 children in residence at that time, ranging from 2 to 6 years old. Some of them looked up when I walked in and went back to what they were doing. Some ignored me completely. One small girl with very serious eyes and 2 uneven pigtails walked directly up to me, handed me a plastic dinosaur, and then walked away without saying anything. Claire told me later that her name was Maisie and that she did that with everyone. I left after 3 hours feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not happy exactly, not healed, nothing as simple as that. But present. More present than I had felt in almost a year, because when you are in a room with small children who need things, who need someone to read to them and play with them and tie their shoelaces and sit with them while they eat their lunch, there is no space left in your mind for the particular kind of absence that grief creates. For 3 hours I had been fully in my body, fully in the room, fully there. And then I got in my car and drove home and sat in the driveway for a few minutes before going inside. I went back the following Saturday. And the one after that. By the third week Maisie had started saving me the specific dinosaur, a green stegosaurus, and presenting it to me the moment I arrived, with the same serious expression and no explanation. I started bringing her books because Claire mentioned she liked being read to but that the staff rarely had enough time. We developed a routine. I would arrive, Maisie would hand me the stegosaurus, I would hand it back, she would put it carefully on the shelf, and then we would sit in the corner of the playroom and I would read to her for 40 minutes while she leaned against my arm and occasionally pointed at pictures with one small finger without saying anything. She was 3 years old and she had been at the facility for 2 months and that was all I knew about her situation and all I needed to know. Something was happening to me during those Saturday mornings and I didn't have a name for it yet. It wasn't that being with these children replaced what I had lost. Nothing replaces that, nothing ever will, and I want to be very clear about that because I think it's important. But there was something about being needed in a small and specific and entirely manageable way that was doing something to the place inside me that had been sealed shut for almost a year. Like light coming through a crack that I hadn't realized was there. About 6 weeks in, something happened that I wasn't prepared for. It was a Sunday afternoon. I had started going on Sundays as well by that point, and I was sitting in the garden with 2 of the older children who were taking turns on the climbing frame, and one of them, a 5-year-old boy named Sam who talked constantly and asked questions about everything, looked at me and said completely out of nowhere, "Do you have any kids?" I opened my mouth and for a moment nothing came out. Which had been my standard response to that question for an entire year, a kind of internal freeze followed by a redirect, a subject change. Something that moved us quickly away from the answer I didn't know how to give. But Sam was 5 years old and he was looking at me with completely uncomplicated curiosity, and there was nothing in his face that required me to protect him from anything. And I heard myself say, I had a little girl. But she didn't get to stay. Sam thought about this for a moment with the particular seriousness that 5-year-olds bring to things they find genuinely interesting. Then he said, "Like us?" And I looked at him and said, "A little bit like you, yes." He nodded slowly, apparently satisfied with this, and then said, "Do you want to turn on the climbing frame?" And I said, "Yes please." I cried in my car afterward for about 20 minutes. Not the hollow desperate crying of the past year, something different, something that felt more like release than pain, like a pressure that had been building for a long time finally finding somewhere to go. That evening I called my mother. She answered on the second ring and I said, "I want to talk about Lily. If you still want to listen." And she was quiet for just a second and then she said, "I'm right here. I've been right here." We talked for 2 hours. I told her things I had never said to anyone, what it felt like in the hospital, what the days after were like, what it was like to come home to a house that had been rearranged for someone who wasn't there. I told her about the blanket with the yellow stars, which was still in the drawer, and she didn't try to tell me what to do with it. She just listened. And then I called Daniel. He picked up and I said, "Can we talk? Really talk?" And he said, "I've been waiting for you to be ready." He came home early from work the next day and we sat at the kitchen table and we talked about Lily the way we had never been able to before, together, both of us, in the same conversation instead of in our separate silences. It was hard. There were long pauses and there were tears and there was a moment where we both just sat there holding hands across the table without saying anything, and that moment was as important as any of the words. I still volunteer at the children's home every Saturday. Maisie was placed with a foster family 2 months ago and the morning she left she handed me the green stegosaurus and this time she didn't take it back. I have it on my desk at home, next to the photograph that is no longer in a box in the top of the wardrobe, because I took it out, and I framed it, and I put it where I can see it. Claire asked me one Saturday morning how I had ended up at the facility in the first place, and I told her the whole story. She listened and then she said, "You came here to give something. But it sounds like you found something too." I looked at her and said, "Yes. I think I did."